spycraft. Because the people you're interested in, like say Angela Merkel, are walking around with a device that has a microphone and a network and a battery in their pocket all the time. And if you can somehow get your malware into Angela Merkel's smartphone, then you can listen in on all of her conversations. And she'll even recharge your spying device for you. That's awesome! Well, so you might say, well, we're just not going to allow smartphones, right? But no less than President-elect Barack Obama famously said, they're going to have to pry it out of my hands. This apparently caused quite a bit of consternation for the people in the government whose job it is to protect the president. Actual photograph. Okay, so we have a tricky problem with these smartphones. Because there's all of this sensitive data, like where you are, your address book, your unique identifiers, personal photos. And we have all kinds of apps that, when given access to this, will abuse it. For example, there was an app called Path that was yet another social network, probably already out of business by now, that uploaded every iOS user's address book without asking permission, so that way it would be easier for them to find your friends. Yay! Anybody have a problem with that? So when people, when security people who like to stare at apps and see what they're doing found this out, and Wired started asking questions, the CEO said, this is currently the industry best practice, and the App Store guidelines don't specifically discuss the awful thing that we were doing. But we're working on it. Doesn't that make you feel better? Meanwhile, so in terms of research, there are really two kinds of things that we've worked on in my group. We've worked on new services that we can put into the operating system to help separate and manage privileges across different entities that may or may not be separate but should be, and how to keep them from tripping on each other's toes. And we've also done a lot of measurement work. This is a recent theme in my academic career, but it turns out that you can write really neat papers by measuring things that are going on in the world outside. So with that, let's talk about the most pressing thing that is generating opportunities for both kinds of research. Ads. Ads are everywhere. So here are two different Android apps. The one on the left is free, the one on the right costs money. They're both dictionary apps, except the one on the left has a little ad at the bottom. See that? It's buy a computer. I don't want to buy a computer. Too bad! Buy a computer. Now, the one that you have to pay money for doesn't violate your privacy, doesn't do any of that other weird measurement stuff, because it's just looking up things on some network service. So how many people do you suppose installed the pay version? Keith gives me a big 0. The answer, according to Google Play, 100 to 500,000 users. They don't give you exact numbers, but that tells you that a non-trivial number of people have spent $3. That's real revenue for this dictionary.com company. How many people do you suppose have installed the free one?
10 million.
Everybody have a guess in your head?
10 times.
So the answer, according to Google Play, is 10 to 50 million. So 2 orders of magnitude. So clearly people want free stuff and will put up with ads in order to get it. This is not a deep observation, by the way. Ads are everywhere. You name it, whether it's games or whatever, everywhere you go there's these damn ads. And there was a lovely paper a couple of years ago that figured out that about 75% of your battery's budget is being used to support ads. So it's not just a security problem, it's just a problem. In just recent months, Google has started making a lot of noise and trying to get advertisers in line to actually try to fix this as a technical matter. And why? Because ad blocking is taking off in a big way. iOS 9 makes it a lot easier for you to block ads. Android, you have to root your phone and install a DNS redirector and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it's a problem. So, how do mobile advertisements work? The ecosystem looks an awful lot like the web. It's pay-per-click, sometimes pay-per-view, app developers get money for hosting an ad, and there are third-party libraries that you include in your app that do all the work. You just sort of say, ad widget goes there, and here's my advertising ID, and money happens. It's super easy and convenient as a developer for you to add ads to your app. But now, how does targeted advertising work? Well, the more that the advertiser knows about you, the user, the better they can target ads, which means the more likely you are to click on the ad, and that means more money. Which of course means that there are strong financial incentives for the advertisers to learn as much about you as absolutely possible. And of course, how do you learn more things? You need to ask for permission to do more stuff. So this causes something that we call permission bloat. Apps that are requesting permissions to do things that they don't care about. The dictionary app does not care about your contacts list. The dictionary app does not care about your location. But it wants those anyway, so that way it can hit you with more ads. And how does that make you feel? And it's not just, and sometimes it gets really confusing. That's malware. No, it's not. It's ads. Well, yes. There was a huge, one of these antivirus firms was tagging a bunch of things as malware, and the company was pushing back saying, it's not malware. And the definition of malware starts to get fuzzy because of advertising. Sorry, yeah.
Just a question, I mean, are you saying, I mean, the internet without ads would be a terrible place, even though that's what Apple's pushing for, right? Google goes away, all the stuff that we want day to day goes away. Are you advocating for that?
I'm about to advocate a technical solution, but first I'm going to tell you how bad the problem is.
Okay.
The first half of this talk is, wow, we have a problem.
I mean, is the problem ads or the technical? I'm not understanding. Is the problem ads or is it how they're implemented?
Yes.
Okay.
So, to understand how bad the problem is, let's do some measurement, shall we? So, yeah, what's happening to the use of permission use over time? So, we downloaded 114,000 Android apps by doing various tricks and things to get content from the Google App Store, and 56% of them had at least one ad library. We extracted all the ad libraries and figured out, tried to collapse together the ones that were the same, and we found 68 different ad library families. It's a really diverse world of ad library code out there on the internet. And this graph shows you the data. The blue bars are the number of apps we found that had that particular library. The red bars are weighted by installs in billions in total. And again, the store reports these 100,000 to 500,000 numbers, which are kind of ambiguous. We're using the lower number. And still, what you see is AdMob, which was purchased by Google, has the absolute leading market position. They have 38% of all apps, and if you dig a little bit deeper, the top 10 libraries have 71% of the installs, the top 25 libraries have 90% of the installs. This is one of these classic situations where a smaller number of players have the bulk of the market share. What does that tell you? It tells you that if you could somehow twist a small number of arms, you could have a large amount of impact. So, we looked at release dates and install counts, and we could take the earliest release date for a given library and say that must have been when that library version came out. You know, so it's not perfect, but it gives us some notion of when, and once we have time and we have permission use over time, we can start graphing them. So how do you measure permission use again? Well, you can separate out the library code from the app code. It lives in a separate Java package. Java packages, even after the various code obfuscators have run, are easy to tell apart from one another. So we can look at the library code, ignore the app code, and look at all the calls made by the library code and say, what permissions are required to do that thing, and then that thing, and then that thing. And other researchers have gone to a surprisingly large amount of trouble to produce a mapping from what call in the Android API is mapped to what permissions required to use it. You'd think that's easy, but it turns out to be hard, and it shouldn't be. But anyways, somebody else did all that work for us. Yay! All right, but again, we're looking at libraries, not applications, and our analysis is super stupid. There's no context-sensitive flow analysis with aliases and class hierarchy. Nope. It's just, is there a call to a function, yes or no? And that means that we have no idea if any of these functions get used at runtime, but merely there's a thing in the library that would exercise a permission if it got used. So that also means that we're not looking for any kind of dynamically loaded or generated code, and we don't verify if the permission is never asked for. Merely because Android lets you ask for permissions in the application manifest, and you use them in, we didn't care about any of that. We're just saying, is there an API call that requires a permission in the add library? A punchline? Graphs. So let me break these down for you, because there's a lot of data hiding on this slide. So internet privileges are effectively universal. Good luck finding an app that doesn't request access to use the internet. They're out there, but they're hard to find. Of course, you know, we have ad libraries that are asking for permission to vibrate the phone. Bzzzt. What? Bzzzt. I've got an ad for you. We've got ad libraries reading various kinds of phone state, like IMEI or other unique identifiers. Well, a unique identifier is useful, because then once they learn things about you, they can connect it all together. Your MAC address is another unique identifier. It's Ethernet. Every Ethernet device or Wi-Fi device has this unique number, globally unique. Again, super helpful for connecting together data you've learned from multiple sources. Boy, you know, let's keep that phone from going to sleep and saving power, and instead blast video ads at you or something. Yay! Let's figure out what kind of network you're on. Is it a Wi-Fi network? Is it a cellular network? Let's figure out your GPS location. And then there are things that are more dangerous. So one of the things you should notice from all of these lines is they tend to be up and to the right. Up and to the right is great if it's your bank account, but up and to the right is not great if it's permission use over time. That tells you that advertisers are getting more grabby on your sensitive personal data. Now, if we change this, this is not install weighted, this is just raw number of apps with features. If I flip it to install weighted, then I'm just telling you what AdMob is doing, but I'll do it anyway. And what you get is sort of a little bit noisier because we had some kind of measurement artifact over here that caused it to briefly dip down, and yay. But otherwise, you can still see, even within with our install weighted thing, nonetheless, there's a very clear up and to the right trend. And that should make you feel sad. Now, these dangerous permissions, by the way, as our data gets older, we have fewer samples because we have fewer apps that we were able to find that are that old. So there's more noise down here, don't panic. But let me show you what some of the dangerous permissions are. Also notice I rescaled the y-axis, so it peaks out at 9%. So this is like PS. Tell me everything else that's running on the phone. Again, a fine way of profiling you. Oh, I see you have Tinder going on. Maybe you're single. hey, visit my dating service. You know, I can infer a lot about you by the apps you have on your phone. How about your web browsing history and bookmarks? That's tasty stuff. How about your Google ID, your Facebook ID? Again, you know, now I've got, I know exactly who you are. And who all your friends are. Yeesh. Or hell, I'll turn your Wi-Fi back on and download more content. Ew. Or maybe I'll just listen in. Or maybe I'll take pictures. Whee! Does anybody feel bothered by this? Right, so back in 2013, nearly 60,000, quote, low quality, unquote, apps disappeared from the Google Play Store all at once. Google claimed that this was, you know, improving quality of whatever. And we're like, hey, wait a minute, we had data from beforehand. Let's go revisit our 114,000 apps and see which ones disappeared. Maybe we can figure out what Google did. So we did that. And we noticed that certain ad libraries had a much higher than expected probability of disappearing. So, you know, Everbadge, AirPush, blah, blah, blah. Clearly, some of these ad libraries correlate very strongly with Google's undisclosed criteria for removing low-quality apps. Some of the things they were doing, by the way, was generating notifications, you know, in your little pull-down notification list, which is really obnoxious, because notifications are supposed to be things that are worth interrupting you about. There is no advertisement for anything that's worth interrupting you, period. Some of them would also install icons on your desktop or do other nasty things. So those, as far as we can tell, are the things Google was looking for. But you can see some advertisers were pushing the envelope a little bit too hard, so Google smacked them down. Oh, sorry, yes?
So then I'm trying to understand the percentage. Is that percentage of that app with that library got booted, or is
Yeah, so
they count for the?
given that the app has this library, what percentage of those apps were removed?
Okay, good.
Conditional probability.
So
Yes.
So, being a businessman, I noticed that very few apps from Google's ad service were removed.
As you might imagine, Google is quite sensitive to its near monopolistic power within the advertising market. And they are, I can only imagine the arguments that went on inside about whether they should take this action. Yes,
Is it possible to use more than one ad library in the same?
data coming in a minute. Short answer, some apps show up with 8 to 10 plus ad libraries inside.
So some of the ones that have, for example, Everbadge removed might still have other ad libraries in them.
Quite perhaps, yes.
And 60.5% is the highest. There was nothing that was uniformly violating user trust. 100% removal.
Not according to our
That's
data,
not- yeah.
and our data is just a sample. There are way more than 114,000 apps out there. But we did our best to get a random sample, but it's hard to control how random your random sample is. Okay. So, privacy is there's two ways that the library might do things, but also the app might talk to the library. There's all these APIs. Like here's the API for InMobi, one of many of these libraries. And here are some really tasty APIs that an app can use to talk to the ad library. Set keywords arbitrarily, whatever those are. Set age. Set location inquiry allowed. Set income. Income? How do you know my income? Ethnicity. I didn't tell you my ethnicity, but maybe they can guess. You know, white Aryan Nation app. Well, okay, probably white. Probably low income. Okay. Am I allowed to say that? Okay. So how often are these APIs actually used? So we tried to cluster different APIs into different labels that we invented. the most arbitrary data was just sending keywords or key value pairs or whatever, and we have no idea what kinds of things the apps might do with them. But what we see is, install weighted, that some of these things like location, age, gender are used on a 3%, 2% of millions and millions, billions of installs. Billions and billions of installs. Single-digit percentages are big numbers. So that's really, and then even when you get down here to these 0.01% say something about your education. 0.01% of 10-ish billion is still a big number.
And arbitrary data and keywords can be anything that comes below.
Our analysis was very simplistic. We just saw that they were calling an API that we gave one of those two labels to. We have no idea what
But
they're doing.
potentially, yes, there could be gender, location.
Yeah. I suspect that a lot of these are used for other less exciting things, but we just don't know. Because they're general purpose APIs, and our analysis was way too dumb.
But the point being that the gender 2.03 number is conservative.
Yes. Right, onward. There's a real curious shape to this graph. So the x-axis is how many installs an app has. The y-axis is how many of these outbound calls from the app to the advertising API that we observed. So you might notice this is what statisticians call a bimodal distribution. There are two peaks in this graph. So what our conclusion is that apps with that are sort of over here in the 5 billion-ish installs, that extra juice, that extra money they can get from saying more about you makes it worth it. 5 billion times small extra revenue equals actual measurable profit. Whereas when you're way up here in the top, if the Facebook app misbehaved at all, can you imagine the giant storm that would happen to them? Because people pay attention to the really popular apps. And Facebook has its own ad library altogether. They don't need to leak stuff in the app. They already know everything about you on their server. And why is there so much going on down on these very rare low? They're just trying to squeeze all the blood out of a stone that they can. They're not succeeding, but they're trying. So, work in progress. We did a quick study where we were installing fake phones on real people's computers and then collecting data by scraping AdMob. And our goal is to download a whole bunch of ad impressions and then see what it looks like. Tentative initial conclusion, we found some cases where we were getting content that correlated with other behavior on the same IP address. We were seeing advertisements that had nothing to do with we had a fake girl and a fake boy and a fake grown-up, and we differentiated them based on the apps that they claimed to have. And we were looking for that. And we noticed some other things that were hey Bob, why did we see this why did we see this advertisement in your stream? That's weird. Bob's like, oh. So people are, ad profiling happens against every possible signal, IP address, whatever. Yay! So, now I've hopefully convinced you that we have a problem. So now let's talk about how we might solve this problem. So the first thing I'll point out is that advertisements on the web already have a ridiculous amount of security infrastructure. And this all works with what web people call mashups, where one website has pieces and parts and bits and pieces from other websites all glued together into one web page. And we have this thing called an iframe. What an iframe does is that it's really a whole separate website running in a whole separate universe that's hiding inside a box, inside a website. So the code is running with a separate origin, it can't talk to the outside can't talk to the inside, except when they can, and those are security bugs that people are trying to fix. But by keeping them separate, among other things, like the outside web page can't create a fake click on the inside ad, because that would be cross-origin interaction, and that's forbidden by the security policy. Android has absolutely nothing like this. The app can totally generate fake clicks on its inbound, on the advertisement, because the advertisement library is nothing special about it. It's running in your address space. It's part of you. So you can create fake clicks, you can do bad things. Does that happen in practice? I have no idea. But it's quite possible. And it certainly used to happen in a big way on the web until people got smart about how to defeat it. So I can, given that these kinds of fake clicks and click fraud, like Google has an entire department called the click fraud team. Like, this is not hypothetical. These are real people trying to defraud other real people. So it's safe to say that click fraud from Android apps ought to be a problem. Probably is, but I don't know, because the people who work on that don't talk much. So how can we deal with the permission problem and the click fraud problem while still letting the dollars flow? Because some people think that advertisement is important. Answer, we built a cool thing called AdSplit. I slaved away in Illustrator to make this, so I'll let you stare at my beautiful Illustrator glory. So the idea was we wanted to let the advertisement layer be separate from the app layer, and each of them, just like iframes, is running in a whole separate world, separate address space, separate permissions, and figure out all of the steps we had to take to make them coexist so the user doesn't notice. But we have better security, click fraud guarantees for the advertiser, better privacy guarantees for the user, and some other cool features that I'm...
Sorry about that.
Is it advertising?
I think so.
Yeah, Ron's phone is pre-advertising. All right, so the first thing we have to do is solve the separation problem. Originally, these ad libraries are just libraries. They're running in process with the apps. So, all right, we can build a separate Android app and put a separate copy of the ad library in each one. We can launch them together. We can, when one of them pops to the top, we can pop the other one to the top. When you rotate the screen for one, we can rotate the screen for the other.
I don't understand what happened.
The advertisers are trying to interrupt my talk.
I guess so.
Anyway,
They got the microphone turned on. They know it's on.
yes, clearly. So we can do all the lifecycle management. This for Shashi was like a year of painful hacking, but it worked. User input is sort of an interesting problem. How can I deal with fake clicks? So we actually came up with a cool cryptographic thing where the UI system digitally signs, sort of, every single click event. We actually used something called HMACs, which are
Sorry about that.
message authentication codes, symmetric key crypto. Read the paper if you care. Suffice to say that it was cheaper to do crypto than to do extra user kernel API calls. Like it was, let me say that again. It was cheaper to do cryptography than to do user kernel, cross-boundary calls. That's a sad statement about the state of affairs, but okay, fine, fancy crypto it is. Anyway, turns out stock Android already has all the facilities you need for the ad library to figure out if it's being covered. That way, if you're worried about a hostile app, having an ad library and just covering you over, so that way the user never sees you, turns out you can measure that. We didn't have to change anything, it's already there in Android. So initially, we said, right, let's do this in an automated way. So we built a machine that could take an app in, carve it into pieces, rewrite the app, shove in our extra machinery, and do all this work. Again, Shashi slaved away for months on this. Poor kid. The touch event validation, this part was really cool. The event system signs the touches. That goes to a central ad service that we created, which then we have our separate service that you can use to verify things, and then it passes these messages on. All this happens completely transparent to the application. It was beautiful. But then we had this realization. So we did all this work just for AdMob. Why AdMob? Because it was the most popular one in the world. Okay, now with 64 left. And Shashi was ready to kill me. And having to re-engineer this automatic separation for every single library and then the libraries keep changing, doing this in a way that will be transparent to apps and will be portable and will continue working every time an ad library invents some new bizarre thing, it wouldn't work. Also, the ad libraries written for the old world without all of our cool click validation and stuff, they wouldn't be able to use any of the cool new features that we could provide. So we're like, this sucks, let's do something better. And then lightning struck. All of these ad libraries, all 65 of them, if you dig inside, every single one of them is just creating a little tiny web page called a web view. And then they go fetch JavaScript and HTML and JPEGs from the internet and shove them into your app. It's just the web. We know that. Web, we can do web. So maybe we could provide a standardized piece of functionality that acts like all of the 65 ad libraries. And then the advertisers can use all the same ad content. Hey, that would be fun. So we call that an ad web view. So no advertising native code required. Instead, you just feed it the HTML and the JavaScript and all that. The browser logic that's already there in the web view enforces all the security permissions, and we can still run it in a separate Android process with a separate user ID, giving us defense in depth. Yay! This does create a bunch of interesting policy questions, like, ad wants to know your location. Yes or no? I have a great mechanism that allows me to provide a very firm answer to the question, but once some policy oracle tells me absolutely yes or absolutely no, I can enforce it and it'll be great. But how do I make the decision? I have no idea. What about ad blocking? Right? Once I've factored the ads out and they're running in separate processes, now it's a lot easier to kill them, which is what I personally deeply want. And that, of course, will make the advertisers not want to support this sort of infrastructure. Although I'll tell you what, you want to solve that 75% power consumption? Once the ads are running in a separate Unix process, then you can bring to bear a whole bucket of OS techniques to ration out CPU and power usage. You get this much data, no more. You get this many cycles per unit time, no more. Operating systems can do that. We can fix that 75% number with this architecture. So the last thing I want to talk about is a little bit about performance. So Android, you're like, oh, my cell phone has 3 gigabytes of memory, and so I don't need to worry about memory anymore, right? Wrong. The people inside Google have sweat bullets to shave every kilobyte off of the memory use of every little thing. They have just absolutely beat themselves silly to save memory, despite using Java and garbage collection. So, because it matters, because not everybody is running a Samsung Galaxy S Star++. So, say a buffer overflow your brain. Anyway, so ye old Android Hello World app is about 1.4 megabytes of memory while running. That's not bad, although, by like good old-fashioned Unix standards, it's kind of embarrassing. You add on a typical app that has, whatever, like it has a web view and then it's using AdMob, because AdMob requires a web view. So now we're up into the 6 or 7-ish megabytes for your basic Hello World with advertising. And AdSplit, now we're going to have a whole other stack with another web view. And then we're going to have, so like, maybe this is your original app, and then that's that secondary activity, another 1.4 megabytes of overhead for Hello Worldness, and another web view. So if I just do the ad split, that's pretty bad. But hey, wait a minute. I don't need that. I don't need the native library, because I told you I don't need it. So I can get rid of that thing. So if you look at it this way, the amount of memory I'm using beforehand and the amount of memory I'm using afterward are within spitting distance of it doesn't matter the same. And I get all these nice new semantics. Although I should have a brief digression. WebView is itself a source of all kinds of security concerns. Android 4.3 and earlier don't have any way for Google to push updated web views at you, which means that any of you in this room running Android 4.3 or earlier? Anyone? Anyone? You're lucky, because those, the Chrome browser inside of that web view has security bugs and Google can't fix it. Ruh-roh. They fixed that in Android 4.4. It's a separate component they can push in real time from the Google Play Store. Hey, what if you are in a country that blocks Google altogether? Like, oh, I don't know, China? Then, there are, billions of people walking around with unpatched security holes in their Chinese Android cell phones. Eek. Anyway, Google concluded that they just couldn't keep backporting the patches. It was too old. They're not going to release another subversion of Android 4.3. something. They give up, time to move on. But for all the vendors making cheap clone phones running ancient software that they can't be bothered to update, the users are just screwed. And Google, sorry, we can't help you. Go get a new phone running a new version of the OS. So, but meanwhile, Google's advice to people who are stuck on older phones was, I quote, always use locally sourced data or HTTPS. Like, that was what Google told app authors to do. But you want to know what the #1 use of WebView is on all the apps? It's to download ads, and almost every ad library downloads its contents unencrypted. So if you were in charge of a major network backbone that gave you read-write access to people's traffic in real time, as a surprising number of nation-states are these days, not just China with the Great Firewall, it's happening elsewhere too, then anybody can inject content into those web views through the advertising requests and use that to take advantage of the latent security vulnerabilities to own your phone. Yay! So ads are a major security vulnerability. Although, curiously, AdMob, despite being unencrypted, encrypts one thing, your location. So if somebody's listening in on the AdMob traffic, they could see your unique IDs and all the other AdMob data, but they don't see just your location. They encrypted just that. There's a really interesting value judgment going on there that I'm not sure I agree with. Anyway. Lots and lots and lots of people have published lots and lots and lots of papers. This is just like a 2-year sample of stuff relevant to some of the things that we've done. For a while, I was jokingly referring to Usenix Security, one of the big security conferences, as Usenix Android Security. Because something like a third of the submissions had the word Android somewhere in their abstract. That's not an exaggeration. Android is big and everybody's working on it. And so there's tons and tons of work in this area. So, wrapping things up and leaving some time for questions. Advertisements pay the bill. They're what make the internet go. They are what create all the dot-com startups with all the dot-com millionaires, which creates all of the undergrads who want to become dot-com millionaires, which creates the demand on us, which creates more CS faculty. No advertisements, no CS faculty. Nonetheless, advertisement is ubiquitous, invasive, it's resource hungry, it's everywhere, it's hard to control, it's largely unregulated, and we can at least build some mechanisms to help restrict it. We can improve user privacy, we can improve power management, we can avoid some of these nasty security issues by centralizing it and doing it once and doing it right. But we're gonna have to get this thing involved called the government. Dun dun dun. Right? I mean, a whole bunch of Google people came up to me after we presented the ad split paper in 2014, like, that's great, how do we get your code? How do we do this? Well, they hired all my people. And, 3 years later, they have, nothing like this is on anybody's roadmap for Android. It's just, and I can build Dandroid in the lab and it'll be awesome, but nobody is going, I can't change the world. And so how, what force has enough power to move Google? It's not me, it's not Rice, it's the government. Probably not our government. Maybe the European government. EU could do this. I'll give the EU credit. Everybody remember cell phones before a certain period where they all had proprietary charging connectors? And if you lost your charger or your charger broke, you were out of luck. Now, the EU required all the phones to use one standardized charger, and then micro USB became the standard. Thank you, European Union. Except Apple still did Lightning. But anyway, don't ask me how Apple got away with that. I have no idea. So my argument is that we know how to build it technically, and the marketplace doesn't have that many players who need to be moved, and they can be moved if given the right nudge. And my hope is to help create that nudge. And that's it. Any questions? Chris? Certainly you have questions.
Well, how does this, Apple's ad blocking change things? I mean, does it seem like that's a huge, they're basically going right after Google, right? And so do you think that Google will, in the interest of self-preservation, will play the role of the government here and do something about this, or are you skeptical that'll happen?
Google is not one person. Google is, tens of thousands of highly opinionated people who argue with each other and call each other bad names. And a lot of them care a lot about user privacy. A lot of them care about making money. And those are sometimes the same people. So I can't predict how Google will behave. What I can say is that Google has gotten behind a standard that they're calling LEAN, and L-E-A-N, I forget what the letters stand for, but basically it's a deeply restrictive subset of HTML with deeply restricted JavaScript, with deeply restricted all kinds of things that would allow for very lightweight advertisement. And eventually, ads that stayed within this lean subset of HTML5 could then be optimized even further because, of course, it's a very carefully restricted subset. This is work in progress. So Google is definitely going after some of this in the guise of an industry consortium and a clever standard. Is that necessary? Absolutely. Is that sufficient? Not even close. But the other thing Google has done in Android 6 is they changed the permission model, which I think was long overdue and back in the old days, which is to say, before a couple weeks ago, Android apps ask you for all the permissions up front. I need this laundry list of permissions. Yes or no. All or nothing. Now, finally, they copied a good thing Apple did, which was asking you right before you use the permission. And that has the benefit that a user can say, why do you need my location? No. Why do you need my contacts list? No. On the other hand, if you're running Yelp, and Yelp says, hey, I'm about to ask for your location so I can give you local restaurants. Okay, why yes, that's what I want. You know, Google Maps needs to know where you are to show you a map of where you are, right? This all makes perfect sense and it's logical, and if you ask at the time that the user is doing the thing that they're about to do, they have this context. I'm trying to do a thing, you're asking me for something that seems to make sense in the context of the thing I'm trying to do. Okay. And by surfacing these dialogues all the way to the user, it has the property that, so Google is in a very subtle way pushing back on permission abuse. Because if Angry Birds wants to know your location, a user's gonna say, what? No. And that will take the game developers and their ad library people, they're going to adjust to that and say, well, I guess we'd better not do that because that makes us look bad. That seems to be Google's tactic. They want to make it cheaper, they want to make it lighter weight, and they want to make subtle changes that will push back against the bloat. Necessary? Absolutely. Sufficient? Definitely not. But it's a start. Yes?
So earlier in the talk you mentioned that in order to understand what permissions the code use, you check the library APIs, those things. So did you check those data against the permissions the app asks from the user just to make sure that they're the same thing, or because?
Right, so remember we had like 100,000 plus apps and 60-ish libraries. So our goal was to have a very good idea of what the libraries might do, not necessarily to understand how they work when you stick them in the context of a running app. Because if you want to do a scalable analysis, if you want to look at 100,000 hunks of code, you can't be real choosy about what you're going to try to analyze. We're not going to go and tweeze them all apart line by line in a debugger and a disassembler. So we had to make some research compromises and say, we're just going to look at the API calls. And if there's an API call that would require a privilege, we'll check the box and move on. So it's a very, very simplistic analysis. But that's enough. It tells you useful things when you do the same analysis over time on a large corpus. You get these nice up and to the right kinds of trends.
Well, I mean, kind of my question was different. I mean, I'm interested to know whether is it any possibility that one app says I'm using these permissions, but at the end it's using some more permissions than what it asked from the user. And
So,
the user gave permission.
can an app use more? So, are you asking what happens if it's trying to exercise a permission that hasn't been given to it?
Exactly.
Oh, it would crash.
Okay, so it's not possible.
Right. But for all we know, there might be a, if I have this permission, then use the permission. We don't see that if line because we're too dumb. That would be context-sensitive analysis, and we don't do that. Yes?
So what do you think of a world where you put a price on every bit of personal information? Like, for example, when I download an app, you would say, I want all these permissions, and I can choose which one I allow, and if I don't allow, the price of the app would increase by some cents. And so, what do you think of that?
Well, arguably, that's exactly what happens when there's the free version and the pay version of an app.
No, but much more fine-grained now, right? So maybe content list is worth $1, locations 50 cents, right? So, what do you think of that?
Everyone would take the free one.
No, I'd pay.
I think it would be a usability disaster. That's the short answer. I mean, embedded in all of this is the fact that we have users. Billions of people worldwide. Whenever my daughter installs an app on her tablet, she's like, Daddy, is this okay? And she shows me the permission screen. Well, and this is what I do for a living, and I just say okay. What does anybody else do? Nobody reads that stuff. That's why Google's changed the model. What am I going to do? No, you can't use the cool video editor that lets you put pictures on top of your grandfather. I mean, I have to let her do that. But all my friends use it. Anyway, you have no idea. Some of you have that. Other questions? Come on. Could I not like give you more softballs to throw questions back at me?
So you raised the point earlier that nowadays Android tells you what app is going to use your permissions for. Do you have mechanisms to make sure they're telling the truth?
Absolutely not. So the new model in Android, which is the standard model in iOS, is that at the moment where a permission is about to be exercised, a pop-up shows right up there and then that says, app foo would like to access your location. Okay, cancel. And then there's a little checkbox that says, shut up and never ask me ever again, which is cool. And then once you do that, the only way to undo it is to go 10 layers deep in the settings to the app's permissions that lets you uncheck the policy changes that you've made. You have no idea what they're going to do with it. Like, people have done a bunch of information flow analyses to see, is the location flowing to the network? Well, of course it is. Why else would they ask for your location, right? But, you know, you could try to make policies that behave differently in different circumstances. You could try to have security policies that were written in terms of information flow rather than this call is okay or not. Nobody anywhere is doing anything like that.
Sure.
The other thing to keep in mind, and this is the deep dark secret sauce, Apple and Google and everybody else in the App Store has an unspecified security analysis. So this is a predicate over apps that returns okay or not okay. What do they look for and what do they do? Do they do information flow analysis? Do they have humans running debuggers and we don't know. Inside Google, they built a thing called Bouncer, meant to keep things out of the App Store. And one of the guys who worked on it, Niels Provos, did a talk at Berkeley, then he did a talk at Stanford, then he was told to never give a talk about it ever again. I'm like, Berkeley friends, Stanford friends, slides, video, anything. Sorry. So we really don't know what they're doing. I mean, but they can, in the App Store, do really sophisticated policies, sophisticated whole program analyses. Google has some cycles that they can spare on this problem.
But would Android help solve this kind of thing? You're isolating apps, the library in a different process now, right?
Right. So, would our system help? Sure. You can solve all. You name the problem, and you can try to solve it statically, or you can try to solve it dynamically. I could try to push a mechanism down into the phone to solve a problem and build an architecture to do it. I can try to push a mechanism into the App Store that reads an app and says okay or not okay. And
it's a policy problem, it's not an intractable problem, it's a policy.
I mean, intractable. I mean, it's not like the halting problem. It's the problem is as much at the policy layer as anything technical. Yes.
Why doesn't Google ban all the other ant libraries?
Antitrust?
Okay. That's the only reason?
Yes.
Why don't they ban like 20% of them, the worst of them, right?
They did that in
They did
2013.
that. Okay.
They did precisely that.
Why don't they ban all except one? Like Intel did to like AMD, only keep AMD there.
Antitrust?
But you have AMD there, just keep one alternative, right?
So
just kill all the others.
I am not a lawyer, and I'm not a Google lawyer. I know several Google lawyers, and I promise you they would refuse to give you an answer to this question. One of them is even a Rice alum, who published research papers with me. He totally will not tell me any answers to any questions like this.
What is the state of the art of running a lightweight VM on Android and trying to get around the privacy issue by running everything inside VM?
The solution to every problem in computer science is to add a level of indirection.
Sure.
So there are a bunch of systems that approach this in different directions. On the one hand, there's an Austin startup that runs an entire Android image in the cloud and into screen scraping to send it down to your phone. There are things, so Samsung built a thing called Knox, which I think Google is or will be adopting, that it's analogous to how slices work in Planet Lab. So there's one OS kernel but multiple userland images. The Android model itself is about processes, good old-fashioned processes that can have separate privileges attached to them. So, do we need virtualization? I don't know. The answer is, you name it, somebody's tried it. I'm a big fan of processes. Old-fashioned, but they appear to work. Other questions?
Maybe a soft one. I think the average person, the most obnoxious thing about ads is invasive. Right? You're trying to look at something and your view is blocked, and there were pop-ups. And then, let's say these laptops develop a facility, you can just say block pop-up. Now what you have are these things, they're just as bad, like pseudo pop-ups. And a typical one is this square that will appear advertising something you're not interested in, and instead of having an X to close it, you have a little thing that says ad choices, which takes you somewhere you don't want. Now, could there be, let's say technically, a way to focus on that particular thing?
So, ad blockers, particularly for the web, are ridiculously awesome. AdBlock Plus lets you drill down deep into the document object model of the web page and say any div that came from there or that has this ID or whatever, remove. It's awesome. So if you think that the ad choices people are evil, gone. No more ad choices ads. If you don't like these single pixel web bugs and all the things that they're measuring about you behind the scenes, gone. If you don't like, so AdBlock Plus and all the other ad blockers are ridiculously good. And then Apple went and made it super easy to use them on their phone, and suddenly it's a crisis. You know, the AdBlock usage has been climbing slowly over time, and why are people blocking ads? Because they suck.
Well, just like pop-ups.
Right, and one unnamed Google friend of mine once told me, look, we don't care if you're blocking ads because you're not the sort of person who would click on ads anyway. So you're just saving us bandwidth. And you know, where does Google make its real money? Not on this ad mob crap. They make their money when you go to Google and you search for Nikon D810, and then 2/3 of the screen is people trying to sell you that new Nikon camera. And those are inevitably better than the actual organic search results. And this is why Google doesn't really care about Apple. They care about Amazon. Because Amazon has gotten so good that you go there to buy anything. And you don't even bother to search for that Nikon D810 on Google. You just go straight to Amazon and search it there. That's why you have this bizarre world where Google wants to get into shopping and Amazon wants to get into cell phones. It all makes perfect sense once you understand that it's really all about advertising. And that's why the Amazon phone sucks and Google shopping sucks, because neither one knows how to do the other one's business yet. Fun facts. Yeah, any Fire Phone people here? One! Does your phone suck, sir? All right, any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
We have a happy hour at Valhalla, so feel free to join us.
And guys, we have next colloquium by Ling Zhang, Professor Ling Zhang, next Thursday at this hour. And you have a happy hour, like Ronnie said, from 5:15 at Valhalla. Thank you.